welcome to the HAI Weekly Research Seminar. Today, I'm really delighted to introduce Andy Konwinski and Dave Patterson. Dr. Konwinski co-founded Databricks, Perplexity, and Laude Ventures, and he advises and invests in startups built by technical founders. And alongside these activities, he also finds time to teach a PhD seminar called Research to Startups in the UC Berkeley Computer Science Department. Dave Patterson, Dr. Dave Patterson, needs little intro to many in this room, but for those who don't know, he's UC Berkeley Pardee Professor Emeritus, a global Google Distinguished Engineer since 2016, the Rios Laboratory Director. Is it like BIOS, or how do you do that one, Dave? Rios, and the RISC-V International Vice Chair. He and our former president at Stanford and department member John Hennessy shared the 2017 ACM-AM Turing Award, which we like to say is the Nobel Prize in computer science, though somehow computer scientists have been picking up Nobel Prizes in the last year, so maybe there's another one here for you, Dave. Also 2021 BBVA Foundation Frontiers of Knowledge Award, and the 2022 NAE Charles Stark Draper Prize for Engineering. That Turing Award and a lot of these awards, I think, are really for the huge contributions Dave and John, through both their research and through their teaching, and their book has really changed the way that a lot of computer systems, all the way from architecture to other kinds of systems, are built and how we analyze them. And I would just say, one reason I'm really excited to introduce these folks is Dave has had impact on the field through his leadership, being the president of ACM, department chair at Berkeley, but mentor to scores of young computer scientists, undergraduates, graduate students, junior faculty. So I'm a graduate of UC Berkeley. My Stanford friends, please don't hold it against me. Go Bears. I bleed blue and gold no matter how much Stanford pays me. And I spend their money. And Dave, I was unlucky not to get to take his computer architecture class at Berkeley. I don't know if he was doing a startup or something at the time. I had somebody else. But when I was a faculty member, as a junior faculty member, Dave was the person I would turn to for advice on how to advise students, how to advise undergraduates. And he was somebody who I feel affected my view of what my job as a faculty member was. And I can't imagine my career without some of the mentorship. So I'm very excited that when I saw somebody got him to speak today, and I was like, oh, cool, I'm here. Okay, so in today's talks, our speakers will present a summary of the view of their recently published paper, quote, Shaping AI's Impact on Billions of Lives. And we'll highlight that we are still in the early days of practical AI, and that focused efforts by practitioners, policymakers, and other stakeholders can still maximize the upside of AI and minimize its downsides. So very in line with what we think about here at Stanford HAI. So without further ado, thank you for joining us. And I look forward to your talk.
James and I are in many ways academic siblings because we both think reverentially of Dave and the impact he's had. And the talk, as you'll see, that we give this talk together is in large part inspired by the work we're doing is in large part inspired by the impact Dave has had, and want to continue to take the torch and pass it forward. Giving a talk with Dave and taking the first few slides could talk more about the impact he's had, but I thought it might be better to have someone else do it.
P6 chip, triple the speed of the Pentium.
Yeah, it's not just the chip, it has a PCI bus. You knew that.
Indeed. RISC architecture is going to change everything.
Yeah, RISC is good.
RISC is good. Why would I or any of us introduce Dave Patterson when you can have Angelina Jolie introduce Dave Patterson? This is a movie from 1995. Who recognizes it? This is not been going well in rooms full of PhD students. 6 or 7 hands. It's the movie Hackers. And so why, besides the fact that we can have Angelina introduce Dave, would we start with this clip? Well, it features the impact of the RISC processor. Even in 1995, Angelina Jolie knew that Dave was right. And she was right about computers. And this was a Wired article from 2 weeks ago in which Dave is featured. There are hundreds of billions of RISC processors on the planet today. You may see ChatGPT make an appearance in this talk later, but 2 weeks ago, I asked ChatGPT who some of the most impactful top 10 impactful computer scientists on the planet are, and Dave was on the list with John for RISC and for many of the other hits that he's going to talk about today. And not only that, this movie had a formative impact on me in my childhood in middle school when I watched it, and I said, that is the lifestyle I want. And that, for those of you who've seen the movie, it turns out is about how computer science has been going for me. It's only funny if you've seen the movie, and you should watch this movie. And since I became an academic and studied under Dave in the Rad Lab and AMP Lab, my academic career has been in many ways fundamentally defined by the type of impact research Dave Patterson talks about, actually did for his 40-year career at Berkeley and has continued to do since then in the research he's doing. And so it showed up in my academic research, in my open source efforts, contributions and co-founding of projects in open source, in the companies I've created, in the class that I teach at Berkeley, and in the new thing that I'm doing with Dave, which is a focus on giving the right resources to the right researchers at the right time. Primarily what we're going to talk about today, it's a nonprofit filling the shoes of some funding that's been going away lately, and giving researchers cash or other resources they need to make the next big breakthrough, or writing checks when they're ready to start companies. I believe that the lab model that Dave piloted at Berkeley and helped co-create is Berkeley's most impactful export. And that's saying a lot, given how much reverence I have for BSD and TCP/IP and RISC and RAID and Apache Spark and the infinite other things that schools like Berkeley and Stanford produce and export in terms of dissemination and discovery of knowledge to our species. The reason I'm such a big fan of this model is because it's about how we maximize the breakthroughs and not, it's like a zoom out, right? It's like one layer meta. It's the derivative of the research. And so I'm a huge fan of it. And that brings us to what is a little unclear in the title we chose for today's talk, is that this is actually 2.5 talks smashed into one. First, we're going to talk about life lessons of Dave's being a researcher at UC Berkeley, building a dozen plus labs, and the lessons he learned with his home runs out of those. This is going to be a talk summarizing a paper he wrote called How to Build a Bad Research Center. Second chapter is a team up he and I embarked on about a year ago, which is the title of the talk, and culminated in a vision paper called Shaping AI's Impact for Billions of Lives. And the third, which is the half part, is introducing to you, before we publicly launch it, a grant program that follows on the footsteps of the paper to fund research pursuing impact through nudging the AI's direct societal implications for the better and dampening its downsides. So those are the 2.5 chapters. Let's jump into the first one with Dave's lessons.
Okay, thanks, Andy. I have, over my Berkeley career, I've got 3 bad advice talks. It's actually John Osterhout, who's here, and I are pals, and we thought it'd be fun to teach graduate students how to explain how to give a good talk by telling them how to give it badly, because we saw a lot of bad talks. And that was so much fun. I did how to have a bad career, and then how to have this bad research center. And the model is, on all the talks, I give commandments how to do it badly. And then if you don't want to do it badly, what should you do? So let's give you the bad advice first. So the first commandment, thou shalt honor thy paper publishers. The coin of the realm in academia is papers and citations. So you need to write, and cite. Thou shalt not mix disciplines. When people are different disciplines, it's a little harder to communicate. It takes time to come from that jargon in different fields. And so you don't get as many papers written. Thou shalt expand the lab. To get research funding, you need a lot of people to review it. So if you put a lot of people involved in the project, kind of they know everybody who might review it, so you'll increase your chances of funding. Don't talk to strangers. Strangers, if they want to learn about what you're doing, they can just read the papers. You're writing a ton of papers. Do that. Talking to strangers slows it down. Similarly, you don't want to disturb the people in your lab, neighbors there, because you're talking to them, you're not writing. So good fences make good researchers is the guideline there. Don't build a graven prototype. You build a prototype that's just ammunition for your enemies to show things that might not work so well. So, and plus you can't write papers if you're building prototypes. How do you make consensus like a group like this? You know, you model the US Congress as this paradigm of decision-making. So everybody participates in all the decisions. Thou shalt not limit the duration of the lab. If you are going to do fundraising, you just tell people you're going to work on this for the rest of your life because you believe it's such a great idea. Don't put any time limits on it. And then just, you know, when I started my career at Berkeley, I think I spent about 2 weeks thinking about what to work on, and then I started working on the thing that I thought everybody wanted to. So I was jump in there and start writing papers as soon as possible. Okay. And I guarantee if you follow these 9 commandments, this will lead to a bad lab. So what do we want to do if you don't want to do it? Honor thy paper publishers? No. Honor positive impact. I'm very fortunate that when I showed up as assistant professor, you know, assistant professors don't know how things work. What do you value? What's important? Is it number of papers? Nope, that's not what they said. Is it sole authorship? Nope. Is it research dollars? Nope. What we care about is impact. So that was great liberating advice for me. And so, you know, the reason they keep track of papers is if it's high impact research, it's probably associated with papers with high citation counts, but it's not this direct measure of it. So for example, you know, one of the dominating pieces of open source software technology is the LLVM compiler from Illinois. It was rejected by the main conference in its field, PLDI. Even the World Wide Web, things that led to a Turing Award, it was rejected by its main conference, the field of the hypertext conference. So usually if something's kind of breakthrough, it's controversial at the time. It's not easily accepted. And I'll tell you about some of the projects that we were involved in, but the first Berkeley risk papers, the highest cited one from the 1980s is less than 1,000 citations. And the paper that Andy and I did together and some other Berkeley people on a vision of cloud computing has 15,000, so almost a factor of 20 bigger than that. So citation counts, there's some correlation, but it's not direct or strong. Even best paper awards aren't predictors of impact. Is the test of time award, which 10 or 15 years later, you look back and say, what was the most significant papers? I think that's a pretty good measure. And rarely the best paper award 10 or 15 years later is also the test of time award winner. And then, so for our projects over my Berkeley career that lasted 4 decades, the sign that we were onto something when it was non-researchers starting to use it, use the ideas, you know, using the open source software or hardware ideas and products. When that started to happen, that was a very positive sign. Thou shalt not mix disciplines? No. I've been saying this for decades, and I've almost spent a decade at Google now. The advantage in academia of multidisciplinary teams is huge over industry. Industry has these giant organizations. It's very hard for them to cross boundaries and collaborate. At universities like Stanford and Berkeley, you have world-class experts, individuals, world-class experts. So it's very easy to get 3 or 4 or 5 of them in a room, and you have these interdisciplinary skills that a lot of companies don't have. It's really hard to compete with companies because they have a lot more resources if you do exactly the same thing to do. But multidisciplinary, I think, is not only easier to compete with companies, there's just more opportunities when it's interdisciplinary because it doesn't come naturally to most people. The other advantage of it is if you're going to try and take on something that none of you have worked on before, there's kind of safety in numbers. Like we did some research in one of the labs around cancer genomics about processing, sequencing there, and it was way out of our area. But the fact there were 3 or 4 of us that wanted to work on it made it more comfortable and gave us greater courage to be able to try things that we wouldn't have tried on our own. The one, it does, if it's multidisciplinary, it is true. It takes a while to be able to speak the same language. There are different cultures, different publishing habits, different vocabularies. There is an education time, but the opportunity there, if you do multidisciplinary work, is so much greater, it's worth that hit. And then, so a lot of the teams, depending how you count, 10 or 12 centers, we aimed at having 3 or 5 principal investigators, faculty. Ideally, each was in a different field to say who was the expert, so we could cover more disciplines. Thou shalt expand the labs. No, faculty are really good at putting these facades together that look like they're collaborating. And at the proposal time, they'll promise almost anything, and the chances of winning the money. And with little regard of whether the lab's going to work when you get that. So you see these proposals of geographically distributed centers, 15 faculty at 7 institutions, and if they get the money, what are their chances of this really working? With the distance between PIs makes it a lot harder, and particularly if they're in different fields, it's really hard to collaborate. You really want to have everybody nearby, so especially when it's cross disciplines, they can educate each other. So this is actually backed up by research. This paper looked at NSF centers, and they said that the multi-university projects were less successful than projects at one university, and projects with many disciplines were more successful, especially when they were at one university. So there's a paper that agrees with my bias. Thou shalt not talk to strangers. No, the key, I think, to the projects that we had success was getting constructive criticism from outsiders. I think that was our key idea. A big part of that is what we call retreats. These were 3-day events held twice a year off-site. This is up in Lake Tahoe. Since I'm old enough to looking back on a project that was 40 years ago, these people have had their own great careers, and they're retired now too. Susan Eggers and Mark Hill both won the highest award in computer architecture, Deckert Mockley Award. There's John Osterhout as a faculty member, and Randy Katz. David Wood and Garth Gibsons were faculty at Wisconsin and Macmillan. There are these twice-a-year things that created a deadline. Deadlines are very rare everywhere, but especially in academia. But people are going to get there, and so you wanted to have something before the deadline. It creates team spirit. We would have fun. We would take breaks and go skiing in the winter or rafting in the summer. It gives the students a chance to give a lot of talks and poster sessions to get feedback with it. And the model that worked, it lasts 3 days. And the last 2 hours was we sat there and didn't argue with the feedback we got from respected people from other institutions. And we would get this constructive criticism and make adjustments. And it was vital to our success. So 20-ish years later, here's another proposal, Rad Lab. So this is Matei here as a grad student. Here's Andy, and he's got a graduate student beard. Now he's got a PhD beard. Me and other faculty, Randy Katz, a link down in front. It was a bigger group. Let's see. Yep. Thou shalt not disturb the neighbors. No, so kind of 20 years into the project, I saw this problem. I came back from sabbatical and people weren't in their rooms. What had happened is that the internet had made that transition so it was as fast as home as it was the university. Before, you had to go to the university to get internet access, and your computers were much better at the university than at home, but people had the same PCs on their desk and the same internet speed. So people were staying home to be more productive. So I don't know when that's a good idea, but it's not a good idea for research. So we tried this model of having remodeled space, maybe just about this size, and all the faculty and the students on the project all sat there together. And that what you aim for in something like this is to have communication and concentration. So like the meeting rooms, you could talk on the phone, you wouldn't disturb people. At the time, it was novel not to have landline phones. We just assumed everybody'd have a cell phone. And then we had kind of like here, food is love. You would have drinks and food, and people could come and hang out and spend the day. It was a comfortable place to be. And it was kind of shockingly, as we went from it it accelerated research. Research went faster based on the space. It was, people came in more, and it led to spontaneous meetings. You'd bump over and coffee, have that conversation that was critical for success. It improves the 0 to 60 time of new students. So Andy Konwinski and Matej Zaharia came in, fresh PhD students in, August, and within 6 months they had a paper that was so interesting that they were invited to give a talk at Carnegie Mellon University. And I had never seen this. Usually for the first year, they're just trying to figure out where all the classrooms are and see if they could see the research. So it was really stunning to see that kind of that rapid explosion. And then after we did it, we did scholarship, and this was a well-known fact. You can figure out how to, in a space like this, you can make 30, 40, 50 people highly productive by having this integrated space. Now, it doesn't scale. You can't have like a room 3 times the size of 500 people. Distance trails off. But it's well known that if you're going to have 30 or 40 people, you can put them in an integrated space and really accelerate everything. The downside was that was great when we moved in for the first time. But the key of this project is, mixing the faculty of different expertise with different projects. And it was difficult because the faculty gave up their space, gave up their external offices to move into space, and we didn't have a mechanism to move back out again. So I would say going forward that if you had the integrated space, you need to have the ability to still mix and match faculty every 5 years after the projects end. Build a Raven prototype. You have to build them. That's where, to get these students from different backgrounds working together on the common prototype. And there's where the sparks of innovation come when you see them working together. Open source projects became more popular over those 40 years, and that's just a boon for academia. It helps with both tech transfer, and you can get more resources to help you with the project. And the downside of the prototype, from a research perspective, is you got to convince the students that working for the common good is good for everybody. And they come around typically once they see other people using their work, and they can see how working for the common good is good for them as well as everybody else. You need a consensus of equals. No, you need to find someone who is willing to spend the time and organize the group, pull the people together, make sure people build the team spirit, make sure people are working on the right thing, and that the other PIs can just not worry that they're going to make the best interest, leave all the decisions to that person so that they don't have to worry about it. I led maybe half the labs I was involved. I was thrilled when somebody else would lead the lab, and I could just sit there and worry about what I was worrying about. Now, what you need is a leader who's there to make the team win and not trying to become the most famous coach, right? You're there for that. Limit the duration of the labs. So I think this is maybe the most unusual piece based on the way other people behave is, well, when I got this advice in the beginning that, hey, all we value is impact, it struck me pretty quickly that most research isn't a home run. It's research. It shouldn't be particularly a home run. So, and I also noticed that if it wasn't a home run, nobody said anything about it. James Lande didn't come up here, and Dave Patterson worked on IRAM, and it never went anywhere. No, he didn't introduce me that way. If they only remember the things that work. Well, if there's no fault for trying things that don't work, and they only count things that work, well, why don't you give yourself more chances to hit home runs? So let's do a lot of 5-year labs rather than 1 or 2 20-year labs. I said all those things. Okay, the other thing in our field, it changes fast. Those of us who've been in the field for a while, it's kind of embarrassing to have us say once again, every 3 or 4 years, wow, the field's really changing fast. Even having said that, I have to say, over the last couple of years, wow, the field is really changing fast. So if you're in a very fast changing field, how do you have a 20-year vision of, what is this field going to look like in 2045? Who knows what it's going to look like? So if you kind of have a shorter term focus, you got a greater chance of being successful. We think of things of being deployed and popular in 7 to 10 years in these 5-year projects. And the other side of it, most research doesn't work. It's kind of awkward to wrap something up. we have a plan going in 5 years, we're going to have an end of project party. The 5-year deadline gets you to move on to the next opportunity. And as not only you and then funders as well, it's very tempting to just kind of hang on until nobody's interested in it anymore, which doesn't do anyone any good. But it's hard to wrap things up. But that's part of the model here. If of the, of the, say 10 labs or 12 labs I was in, probably 4 or 5 were home runs. So that meant a lot of them worked. So I'm really glad I got to do it. I got the chance to do new things. There's downsides. Students come in, they've heard of the old labs, that's easier to recruit them. Companies heard of the old labs, that's easier. But what's the goal? Is the goal to make it easy to do money, raise money, and easy to do recruiting, or is the goal hitting home runs, having impact? Thou shalt not delay. This is my last campaign. Think before you act. I always thought, rather than spending what I did to start my career, like 2 weeks or 2 months thinking about what to work on and several years doing it, well, why not several years figuring out what to do and then 1 year doing it? But think before you act. In academia, you get to pick whatever you want to work on. With us doing these 5-year projects, we have to do that regularly. So it became a part of the culture that we would take spend almost a year where we'd be kicking ideas around, see who wanted to work on what topic, reform teams, and then sharing our preliminary thoughts with people before we had an agenda that we wanted to go forward. We had to do it more regularly, but even if you do it less frequently, spending time and picking the problems is pretty important. So here are the ones over my career. The ones in highlights, I think you could make an argument were very successful. The risk stuff, which I got in the introduction. RAID is a storage system. It's at the time they were very big disks. That was the common, and we replaced them with a lot of small disks and make them redundant. It's probably the most widely used dependability scheme after Hamming codes for main memory. That project also did with Mendel Rosenblum and John Osterhout, the log structured file system, and Postgres, which is a very popular open source database system, Postgres SQL. The Network of Workstations project, we tried to build a supercomputer out of workstations and using switched local area networks. Our original goal was supercomputers, so it was the first cluster in the supercomputer top 500, and now 90% of the supercomputers are clusters. We also did database search with it, gray sort records, but the breakthrough was the Ink2Me project. We had a new faculty member, Eric Brewer, came in and he looked at that technology and saw what was going on in terms of search engines and said, that's the right technology for search engines. At the time, the leading search engines was Alta Vista running on a kind of a large mini computer, and we used clusters of PCs to be able to provide, cost, scalability, dependability advantages. And they even did a search engine at Berkeley called Ink2Me, which for a while was the leading search engine, even at Berkeley. He started a company with it, then Google came along and had a better search engine and a better business model. But still, the internet clusters was the technology people using. The RAD lab, that led to probably the biggest impact was Spark. That story, did I already tell that story about Andy, how he came up with it? I can't remember. All right. So in this integrated lab, he was sitting next door to machine learning students who were trying to use MapReduce to solve their problems, and with no luck. And because they're sitting next door, they talked it over, and he realized, what? Matei did, yeah. So did I say Andy? Yeah, sorry. But Andy, he came up with a new programming system for the data center that could do machine learning much more efficiently. And that conversation led to Spark, which led to Databricks, and very successful. And I think 40,000 organizations use Spark. And the ParLab one is coming back to the hardware area as part of that exploring hardware. Krista Asanovich decided we should look back from the 80s, redo a brand new risk architecture, and let's make it available for everyone to use, but we expected academia to use it. And RISC-V became popular with industry. It's just celebrated its 15th anniversary, and now there's billions of chips shipped every year and hundreds of organizations involved. From a faculty perspective, there's about 13 of the faculty involved were later elected to the National Academy of Engineering, which is a very high honor, and that's about 3/4 of the people at Berkeley who are in the NAE. It's, besides the technical impact, it's tremendous for graduate student education. It kind of nurtures them, throws them in working together, and solves interesting problems. So what struck me was, over my long career, Mark Weiser, who is a computer visionary, the SPUR project, kind of the fourth RISC project at Berkeley in the late 80s, said, this is the best group of grad students I've ever seen. And then kind of 20 years later, Burton Smith, a famous computer architect on the Parlab students, he said it almost exactly word for word. This is the best group of grad students I've ever seen. So Berkeley and Stanford get really good input, but I think the kind of nurturing nature of the job, let them shine, let them show what they can do, and clearly Andy and Matei are examples of that. Okay, so summarizing this part of the talk, aim for positive impact versus lots of papers. Honest feedback really increases chances of success. Kind of a lab-wide prototype brings the pieces together and helps demonstrate what you can do. You need to find someone willing to lead the way. Faculty aren't great managers, so somebody has to take that over. And the space surprisingly can accelerate progress. And take your, the picking the problem to work on is vital. It's as important as the research you do on it. And my advice is you aim for, keep people together, multidisciplinary labs with sunset clauses. And there's a paper you can read about that. And I think with that, I think I reflect as I look back at this slide. I go back to this slide. So this is what, I got that advice and I did 5-year labs. What if I hadn't done that? What if this slide was X-tree and it was just 40 years of X-tree? So with that, I'll turn it over to Andy.
That's a great question. Are you logged into ChatGPT?
No. Oh, I don't. I haven't tried to my laptop.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you, if you open one of the chat agents in the world and ask them that question, what would the world be like if Dave Patterson hadn't moved on from X-tree? And actually, I don't even know. Is one of them, well, let's try one that I know is free that you can use without paying. I don't know if you can do the others. I can't remember because I'm always logged into everything. What would happen? What would the world be like if Dave Patterson? We've never done it on this one. We have no. And by the way, sometimes it's like, meh, probably would have happened anyway. And sometimes it's like the world would have ended. So definitely we're rolling the dice every time I do this to the demo gods, but had not moved on from X-tree and done risk. Gotta, like prime the model. Okay. Gonna have a much more well-cited answer. I think you like bounced. It's thinking.
Telling you its intermediate thoughts.
Yeah, I guess so. If he had remained focused on X-tree, the technology landscape would look markedly different. Maybe risk wouldn't have dominated, CISC might have won. We'd be carrying those really heavy laptops still in our pocket or in our backpacks instead of cell phones. Textbooks? Oh, really? Where? At the top? I see. Okay, yeah. Okay, well, LLMs can predict the future, so maybe they can reflect on the past as well. Okay. Oh, great. Now I've got to find this one. Look at that. Okay, so I knew of Dave's, I think of inheriting Dave's legacy a lot. And he left such a deep impression on me while I was working in Rad Lab. And we worked on this paper together, which I'll talk about in a second, which he mentioned, the cloud paper. And so while I was off doing AI companies, I always had in the back of my mind the power of the model that we used at Berkeley, that Matei used when he kind of sat with machine learning students. Michael Jordan's, including Lester Mackey, was who was faculty here for a while, is at Microsoft now, and had the ideas for Spark out of this playbook. And that's why I approached Dave. So knowing that Dave had written this paper and had a legacy full of ideas about how we should fund research, or not fund, but how we should do research, I had this idea in 2024 that maybe Dave would be interested in teaming up to make more impact focused labs happen in the world. So this was about a year ago, a little more. So I asked him to get beers about a couple blocks from his house in Berkeley. We met up and we came up with a plan. It was inspired by this vision paper that he mentioned 15 years ago that we wrote in Rad Lab, which itself had a large impact. All these citations that Dave mentioned, and which was a collaboration across a bunch of authors at the time, focusing on a technology paradigm that was less far along than AI is now. So there are some differences between the vision paper that we then, in our plan, decided to write. So a year ago, we came up with, yes, let's write a new vision paper. Here it is in its earliest form. We need to get more authors. Let's write about the impact of AI on society. And we bemoaned that day some things that Dave's going to talk about that led to the paper. He's going to tell you about the paper. But importantly, we said, because maybe we weren't quite as early to this paradigm, and we're not going to be able to predict the puck in the same way we did at the public cloud paper, what's going to be really special about this paper is that we're not just going to put forward a vision paper. In fact, there are many amazing vision papers about the impact of AI, several of which come from Stanford. And this paper has Stanford authors on as well. But this one will fund the research. We'll put forward moonshots, we'll fund them. So that requires the paper to be written, and Dave got to work. All right, these slides are.
Okay, hi. Oops, I hit the wrong button. Here you go. So this was quite a challenge. We had written a couple of visionary papers that were very highly reviewed. In fact, we wrote one, and then somebody bet me we could never do it again. And so that what led to the cloud paper. And then so Andy comes back with that memory. Can we do it in AI? Like I said, geez, there's a lot of stuff out there. How do we do that? So we had 4 assumptions going in. The first was, although AI has been around 70 years, it's now that it's starting to really work, it's still early enough that research could make it better, the upsides better, and make the downsides not as bad. That there's somebody out there willing to listen to us. That was another article of faith if we put something together. And the scary things, it wasn't just people in our field like AI practitioners, but the public and policymakers, right? That's an ambitious goal. Before we already did these projects just with the people at Berkeley, but we wanted to get a lot of people involved in a lot of different fields. So we hoped we could get kind of an all-star team from all kinds of organizations. And then we would supplement that expertise by talking to dozens of experts in the field. The fields we picked were employment, education, healthcare, information, media, governance, science. And then the other thing that was different from when we wrote those other vision papers, it wasn't this social networking dominated society where people would make snap judgments based on 20 seconds of looking at a paper. So what was going to happen there? So we wrote this paper. I guess I'll show you the papers, then I'll show you the authors. So this was the paper, and if you want to look it up, it's shapingai.com. And this was the output. It's 30-some pages. 9 of us worked on this for 9 months, so it wasn't short. To get publicity, we got invited to give a 1-page kind of version of it, the highlights, to hope that we do that. And then, as of today, to reach out to the public, the comic book version, which we are very proud of. And this is the first day we've had it. So did you already distribute them, Pete? People? Yeah, so some people have them. You have this is the first edition. This is part of hoping to reach out to the public. Okay, so the all-star team, people, there's senior people like me and John Hennessy. John's in the upper right corner there. People from startups like Andy and Pella Nomi. And then rising stars in AI like Sami in the back there. And other people you might know, Jeff Dean, Emma Pearson, who's now at Berkeley, Fanali Doshi Velez, who's at Harvard, and then Tino Cuellar, who's a policy guy, and Jeff Dean, my pal at Google. And we got really good people to interview. John Jumper, we interviewed him a month before he won his share of the Nobel Prize. President Barack Obama, former National Security Advisor Susan Rice, a former Google CEO Eric Schmidt, and 20 other people, many of whom are also well known. So, after doing the interviews and talking it over, we came up with 4 kind of guidelines or principles based on that apply to all the fields. The first is AI and people working together to do more on their own. So if we get AI focused on human productivity, that's going to have a lot more positive benefits to society than on human labor replacement. If you're going to increase employability, if you're going to increase human productivity, that increases employability. So they become more employable, not less employable. Also, people can act as safeguards when AI, veers off course. And maybe a place to start rather than, very ambitious goals. Well, it's not easy to do, but to try and make people's life better by removing drudgery of their current tasks. If we pick K through 12 teachers, maybe the grading or the notifying people of how their students are doing isn't their favorite thing. They like teaching. And healthcare workers don't like filling out paperwork as opposed to helping patients. Maybe that's a good place for us to start. You would focus on human productivity. And if we do that, we think it'll help both AI succeed and people succeed if we work on working them together. Technology has long changed the job market. So almost 2/3 of us have jobs that did not exist in one human lifetime. In 1940, those jobs didn't exist. So to illustrate that, I collected data from the US Census over 5 decades. And in 1970, there were more typists and telephone operators than there were programmers and lawyers. And you can see 50 years later, those jobs have relatively almost disappeared, and we have many more programmers and lawyers. And Tino, who's a lawyer in our group, said this was a very sad day when we had more programmers than lawyers, but I was okay with it. Now, the economy, we're talking to labor economists, they said, look, a healthy economy relies on improving worker productivity. 2/3 of the population on this planet lives on countries that are facing a declining population. Like 2/3 of us. So if I chose, I'm going to be able to retire. But the number of 50-year-olds who are going to be 50 years old 50 years from now, they've already been born. So given the declining populations, if we don't improve productivity, it's going to be tough for you guys to retire. So that's something we need, and AI could help with that. And so if we're going to increase employment, let's aim these productivity improvements in fields that create more jobs. So 2 examples of, despite tremendous productivity improvements, we have more jobs are airline pilots and programmers. So we have 8 times more commercial airline pilots, 11 times more programmers than before. And trust me, 50 years ago, computers and programming languages were a lot less productive than they are today. What do economists call that? They say if it increases the jobs, it's called an elastic thing. Basically, if you decrease the cost of the good, if the demand goes up more than the decrease, then that's an elastic and it creates more jobs. In contrast to that, US agriculture is inelastic, so productivity gains mean fewer jobs. Kind of basically, just because you make food cheaper doesn't mean people necessarily eat a lot more food. So in one human lifetime, it went from 1 in 5 people in the United States work in agriculture to it's 1 in 50 today. So huge changes. That's an elastic one. The third guideline is geography matters. Nations like ours worry about people going to school for a long time and getting displaced by AI. But in a whole lot of the world, there's just not enough expertise to go around. So Honduras, a little bit south of Mexico, has 1/7 the number of physicians per capita as the United States. So in these areas where maybe they're limited by expertise in terms of their economy and growth, AI could really enhance their quality of life and accelerate economic growth. The last guideline is just, if we're going to measure progress, we got to use the right tools. And we won't be able to make the claims about AI if we can't measure it. So in high stakes domains like classrooms, we want to use A/B testing and randomized control styles. For things like programming productivity, we can probably get away with surveys. But even once the tools are deployed, we have to be able to measure to make sure that they really work, that if they're doing what they claim or they have externalities we didn't know about. And then if we're going to upgrade it in the field, we have to keep measuring it to make sure we're improving it. So how are we going to influence the AI community to do this? So what we thought we would do, what we did do in this paper, was come up with a bunch of milestones. And rather than, hey, let's just develop technology and throw it out there and see what happens, we give us explicit milestone and say, and if you hit that target, we believe that it will only it'll advance AI as well as help society. And so we put 18 of them there. And then if there's plenty of research to do it, that's fine. If not, then let's start these research centers like Andy participated when he was a grad student. And then to encourage people to try and hit the milestones, we'll do inducement prizes, $1 million prizes associated with the milestones. The best known inducement prize is probably the X Prize, but the difference between that, it's not like, not a prize for your career advancement. It's here's a mark, and if you hit it, here's the reward. Government has a similar model that's not called an inducement prize. They're called advanced market commitments. You could think of them as kind of inducement purchase orders. They write a purchase order for millions of dollars for a product that doesn't exist, and that will inspire companies to build that product. This is how the COVID vaccine was developed in the United States. This is how NASA deals with private rocket ship companies. And then rather than, and these ideas came up a year ago. So rather than rely on the government for funding, we thought, why don't we rely on the people who've prospered in the industry to fund these prizes and centers? So what could happen here? A report came out when we were doing this from the national academies, and in that report they said, some people think it's got the potential, AI has potential to increase the gross domestic product of the United States, the rate of improvement from about 1.4% where it was to 3%. What would that mean if we doubled the growth rate? Reducing poverty, improve healthcare, better for the environment, stronger national defense, and reduced budget. That's a pretty big deal. It could potentially, another paper pointed out, the middle class of most high-income nations have been hollowed out between globalization and computerization. It could potentially rebuild that middle class. And as I mentioned, in the lower income nations, it could make that expertise more widely available, which is a big help. So I think when we got started on this journey because Andy's kind of frustrated about the accelerationists and the AI doomers arguing all the time. What gets lost in all of this is that it's just as big a mistake to ignore the potential gains of AI as it is to ignore the potential risks, because the gains could be very large. So as we wrapped it up, we thought maybe the right thing to do was to do a moonshot, like President Kennedy did in 1961, famously predicting we'd get to the moon by 1970, which motivated a lot of engineers to try and make that happen. And it was a surprisingly frustrating experience because we couldn't agree on what the moonshot would be. Should it be broad AI for healthcare, make scientific progress go faster, help heal the civic dysfunctionality in the recourse, or help with displaced workers? And then we realized we don't have to pick one moon. If we do this right, we can use AI to launch 1,000 moonshots. And with that, I think the question is, how are we going to fund this?
Very important question. The answer is a nonprofit called Laude Institute. And that's not been announced publicly yet, but it is funded by individuals who have benefited from computer science research, starting with me. So I will fund the first few labs. Thanks. And the list is not just me already. We have 2 or 3 other commitments from other people who've done very well, including some of my co-founders. So there's me thinking about all the money I'm going to spend. Okay, so this thing is called Laude Institute. Dave is deeply involved. Jeff Dean is involved. The folks who are co-authors on the paper have informed the idea and are advisors, and we've collected advisors from across all of the top 10 universities, top 15 kind of top CS universities are advising this thing. We'd love to have you and your thoughts help shape the direction of the thing. And what do we think of it as trying to do is move all of humanity forward faster. Now, when we say, I think humanity is moving forward pretty fast. So while humanity is moving forward faster and faster, we're going to especially focus on not leaving behind people and having all of humanity, not just the vanguard of humanity, not just those of us that want to be on Mars and have progeny on Mars, move forward faster. So Laude Institute, which will come out of stealth next month, so please don't tweet or talk about this publicly, aims to give the right resources, the right researchers at the right time, including this moonshot grant program that we're going to talk about in a second. But besides that, we also organize events We give other types of resources, like we've hired engineers and communications and community people. We've given GPU credits to PhD students sitting in this room so far. And we use the resources we have to make sure that we get economist articles, and folks at the Atlantic are interested in the things we're working on, and just help us have a contribution as researchers to the discourse happening around the impact of AI. Not just like we want the Jeff Deans and not just the Sundars, and the Ilyas and not just the Sams to be talking about this stuff. Okay, this brings us to what we're actually, our flagship launch out of the Laude Institute will be the Moonshot Grant Program. And what it looks like is starting with the new commandment, since Dave wrote that paper, the 9th commandment, which is think hard about what you're going to build your lab around. We're going to fund 2 teams per topic for about 4 topics. We'll look at the topics in a second. And we put forward basically 4 of these planets that we want you to pick moons around. So we'll get to those in a second. So we'll pick 2 teams per, so about 8 moon seed grants, $250K per seed grant. What you get if you win the seed grant is you get 6 months to basically propose a lab. That lab will be a $10 to $20 million lab. So it'll have to follow the pattern that Dave just laid out in the 40-year lessons that he got from his career of having impact out of research this way. And to help you prove, or for you to prove that you thought hard and have a vision, you yourself will publish a vision paper during that 6 months that flesh out your moonshot vision. You will point to some open source existing benchmark or a new benchmark that you build in the 6 months by which you can measure progress towards your moonshot. Now, we understand that not all research can be measured from the first moment, but it's important to have some culture of measurement. And then as a lab, if your lab is funded for the full 5-year lab, the lab will be responsible for stewarding an inducement prize around the moonshot. And so your lab will facilitate a global community that will participate for a cash prize provided by the Laude Institute to help the lab make progress and build a community around the work. It also needs to point at some open source code. At least you need a GitHub repo to prove that you have people in your lab that write code and want to open source it. We also understand that you won't make a breakthrough in your open source project in the first 6 months necessarily. We would give you extra points if you did. And then finally, you'll actually put down a proposal. So a short kind of extended abstract that will lay out the folks that would be involved, a multidisciplinary team of a PI plus co-PIs plus PhD students, more standard things that you'd be used to for a 5-year lab proposal. The applications will open next month when we launch Laude Institute, and then the deadline will be in the fall, and then the 6 months kickoff after you get the cash in hand for the seed grant. Now let's spend 1 second talking about, we chose a subset of the areas in the paper that we explored as the founding targets. So I think of these as the planets that we want you to pick moons around for your moonshots to go kind of hit those moons. Functional civic discourse in the next 5 years. Century of scientific progress in a single decade. Should have quotes around it. That's Dario's input in his blog post. To build a broad AI for healthcare practitioners, or if you could be so bold to reinvent the US healthcare system. Workforce reskilling to counter AI displacement. Pick one of these, make a proposal in great depth about how you might use AI or other techniques to shape the impact of AI in these areas. That's it. That's our grant proposal process, and that's 40 years of lessons from Dave and how we're turning that into reality.
Okay. I noticed in the set of labs, Dave, over your career, that the number of students were growing. So like the last NPIs. So early on, it's like 4 or 5. Later, it's 7-ish PIs and 35 to 40 students. I'm wondering if you think some of the problems that are the biggest scientific problems, and especially with your time now at Google, require more of what I would call team science. So maybe larger teams, and also with something that is harder in the university environment, which is professional research engineers on those teams in larger numbers rather than like 1 with 10 grad students. Is there a change you see there, or is it the same as when you did the early labs?
Yeah, I think there's a size that's effective, and I think the size that can fit in one room, and I think 3 3, 4, or 5 faculty and, some tens of grad students is a pretty effective team. I think, I'm naturally an optimist, but I think it's that I believe if you get the right ideas, the ideas can change the world. And if you have the ideas right. So I don't think it necessarily needs a much bigger team. Because I think in research, you're trying to demonstrate something that's convincing enough that people will do it for real. I think that's our job. I don't think that we necessarily, need to make a vaccine or something like that. So we'll see what happens, but I don't think we have the funding. We can't do $50 million labs. I'm not even sure it's a good idea. I think as the labs got bigger over time, that reflected. I and others are getting more successful at fundraising, but I don't know that was necessary to do that. So I think it's kind of like faculty members remember when there weren't as many students on the campus. I think I like those. I think those labs are very effective. Kind of the target we talked about, I think, is very effective. Our premise is that breakthroughs in AI allow us to do very ambitious things, right? And it's not that we're gonna do a Manhattan project because we think it's possible, and we're just gonna get an army of engineers and scientists together to do it. The premise is this rapid advance in AI is going to let us do something, and if we focus on the positive aspects of society, then we can simultaneously push the state of the art in AI and really benefit society. So yeah, so I don't think we need to have professional research engineers there. In the labs that we did, having kind of one, if we were doing hardware, having one hardware staff program or maybe 1 or 2 programmers like in the lab there, one full-time professional, having a couple of those people that's pretty useful. But we never had like a team of programming to do all the work, and the grad students didn't have to do that stuff. And I don't think that would be healthy. I think when I've read about scientists in other fields, the scientists who kind of stay in their office and do all the orchestration and give talks all over the world, but don't go into their labs, don't seem to have the same impact as the people who are in the lab and can see what's going on. And often it's not what you expect, right? And so I think the people involved there, and I think by keeping it that kind of 3 or 5 faculty and tens of grad student science had some very effective teams. So I think that was my answer. The other answer was no. I'll try and shorten my answer. Go ahead. Oh, back here. Okay, you got the microphone, so maybe that's.
Yeah, I got the microphone. Yeah, thank you so much, Andy and Dave. I really applaud the Laude Institute idea as well. I think it's really interesting, and I'm curious to know more about the design choice of supporting only 2 teams for seed grants, and then kind of like seeing them through into 5-year Berkeley style labs over kind of like letting 1,000 flowers bloom, which is usually the philosophy that we see from funders. So was there like some intentional decision for why only 2 teams and like the seed stage instead of many, and then choosing the ones that are successful?
You want me to take it? You want to?
Sure. I'll take my quick pass. We want the people who apply to this to take it pretty seriously, and I think that it's a different mode of doing research than a lot of researchers at top universities are used to doing, and so I think we'll be doing great to get enough applications to fund some of these where even with this lower count, we're looking for, I think, depth and commitment to a process and less. I don't personally subscribe to the 1,000 flower bloom approach. I'm a little more of the opinionated approach.
Yeah, let's see what happens here, right? There's somebody asked us how it could fail. One way we'd fail is the faculty just repackage the research they're doing anyways and pretend that they're doing this, and we'll get a bunch of not very imaginative proposals. The other way fail is they'll take it seriously and get some really great ideas down, really rethink about it. If that happens, there's this chance we just don't have enough money to fund everybody, right? But if that happens and people get fired up about their ideas, that's certainly what happens with us in the labs when we do these studies, is once we come up with the idea and we're excited about it, then we want to go make it happen, right? And so we're not going to be able to fund everybody who submits a proposal, but there's this chance that people will, okay, well, I want to do this whether or not I'm selected as a finalist. I would like to see if I can go find funding. And I think that's possible in this economic climate. Well, no, not economic climate, in this political climate, that maybe more people will want to look for alternative ways to fund science than that. So maybe, a high success ratio where we'll get this started, we'll be able to fund some, but maybe others will be able to do it.
One also a side note that while my intention is to bootstrap the thing, and I'll spend a lot of money doing it, we are already fundraising and will raise much more money than I put into it. So, we're not out, like hundreds of millions and billions, low billions is not out of the question. And if that, but the point, like any great impact-oriented thing, is to prove it out first and see if that'll be the best problem to have. If we have 7 projects to fund and we can only fund 5.
We were thinking the way we thought about the 2 finalists is if we can only fund, we'll certainly fund 1 and at most 4 centers, then how many people do we want competing in the second round? And we thought, I don't want to waste people's time too, but if you have a 50% chance of getting a big lab and then I thought we thought that would be a good way to do it. Yeah.
I was just thinking the other way to circumvent these power law requirements when you're doing moonshots, right, is having one team do 10,000 research projects at once, right? And so given your guys' background, like I'm very curious whether or not you'll have a thesis around the modernization or digitization of labs, whether it be related to the knowledge work, right? So the ML paper that got into an ML conference using ML to do ML research, or if it's just around some of the physical activities, right? We've seen lo-fi versions of this with like a scientist, which is trying to be Amazon for lab.
If you notice bullet 2, bullet 2 is a century of progress in a decade. And I think that's Dario Amode's paper. And I think it's this automation of the labs is part of that vision. Right. So I think, well, we would be happy if you did one of these. If you can do more than one, we would be happier. But we think these are ambitious enough that if this worked and demonstrated the model, then it could, this could become, make it even more popular.
I want to ask about the last one that you're trying to fund. How do you think this should be a research project? Because this should be something, and why not companies? Why not something that would be for business or even a non-profit, but for the last point? I'm building something for that, and I would love to talk to you guys about it.
Sure, yeah. Laude Institute is dedicated to funding research in the open. Open everything is how we talk about it. So open discourse, open weight, open model, open source, open publication. There is another half of the Laude brain, which is called Laude Ventures. And there's a firewall between the two, which is to say that the VC side can't decide what funding goes into research. And the research side, which has a board of professors and industrial researchers that, is what we're talking about, won't be able to decide exactly what gets funded. But there's an alignment of incentives. So Dave is an investor in the fund, and many other people involved in the institute are investors in the fund. The thesis across both halves of the Laude brain is for and by researchers. So you want to democratize both in this way, funding of research, and be opinionated about it by having high impact, distinguished researchers who've had big breakthroughs shape the grant programs and administer and help decide on the actual funding. And same on the other side, you want the folks who built many decacorn companies out of research to be directly involved in the funding, and they are. So the venture half of Laude has raised, as its investors, 50 professors and PhDs who have started companies themselves. So happy to talk to you with either hat on, because we do believe that right research, right resources to the right researchers at the right time should cover the full life cycle.
Yeah, to have impact, sometimes you just have to put the paper out there, and sometimes you have to start the company. And sometimes an open source project do it, and they're going to provide resources to help all of those things.
So ideally, when people give to Laude, I'd love for them, and already what we're piloting out is write 2 checks. The first check goes into the philanthropy side, and longer term, the second check, which is equal or larger, and to the VC side, can pay you back more than more than 10 times over for the philanthropy check and create a virtuous flywheel. So that's kind of the vision.
So I have two questions. So first part of it is actually, will this lab has to be attached to a faculty university? Could it be something independent that is not attached to any academy? That's one question. And could you also elaborate the key difference between funding a lab and funding a startup-like approach? Key difference between the two criteria, right? So that's just two.
Let's see, the first one was,
Universities only for now, yes.
I think we're going to start with universities for sure. I'm just writing a paper about this, Vannevar Bush in 1945, right after World War II, wrote this amazing paper, Science and Endless Frontier. And in return for investing in university science research, we would pay back and improve healthcare, and improve the economy, improve the national defense. And it's an amazing model, right? It's one of the advantages of universities is it's very cheap. The faculty are paid to teach, and they get a little bit of summer support. The overhead's much lower than industry, and you get all these bright graduate students who are also paid very little to be able to do this, and the overhead's less. So they've got really smart people who don't know what can't be done. So this is a very powerful engine, that's a little bit in jeopardy right now. So we'll start with the universities and see if we can make this work. Because I've been talking about, hey, this is what I do for labs for a while, and so far not everybody else does it. So we're going to see if this works. But I'm pretty sure we'll start there.
Yeah, and the difference between when it would be an investment from the institute, the nonprofit, into a research project or a company, which would count, is literally different bank accounts, different decision-making processes, different but related pools of people. One would take equity in exchange for the money, and the other takes your commitment to open source and open publish everything you do. So the one is catalyzing breakthroughs, and the other is trying to build a relationship with that researcher who had the breakthrough, which benefited humanity, and what didn't happen behind closed research doors, and then help them become a billionaire. And then hopefully give a bunch of their billions back to the research.
If no one has another question, I was really interested in this open source idea. And so I wanted to ask you whether or not you had any opinions on when research projects are better off going open source versus some situations maybe they help society by not. Do you have any thoughts, interesting case studies around that?
Can you give an example of when a research project shouldn't publish? I mean, do you mean open source or open? You want to get like proprietary secret? When does that help from a research perspective? I mean, it helps when you're a company. And so if you're a company doing research, that's great. And if you want funding, we can talk to you about that from like investing in your company idea. Like win one or the other, it really depends on your motives and what sort of type of organization you are.
I mean,
optimizing revenue.
Yeah, but this is like I said about the Vannevar Bush model. The one thing academics are absolutely going to do is write papers. And as I reflect back, because I'm working, they asked me to write something up for communications at AAC. I'm kind of making the case for funding research at universities. And as I reflect back, there were several times where we wrote a paper and people we had no contact with decided, went with the idea and formed big companies and made lots of money. But I think companies, I'm working at a company now. Publishing is hard at a company, right? There's all kinds of controls on it where you can't stop academics from publishing. You couldn't stop it if they can. So they're going to share what they've learned of success or failure. And that's an important part of the research institution. So I think, the money goes so much, there's so many benefits, including training students, stuff like that. I don't think we seriously consider giving money to companies, but I would share my opinion loudly.
At those companies.
Yeah, research at companies, the companies can fund that, but it feels like it's 10 to 1 in terms of the amount of work you can do at academia versus if you give that money to industry to do that.